One thing that sci-fi and fantasy stories can do very well, my friend, is exploring culture shock. Now, typically, since these are kind of made-up worlds, these tend often exhibit very extreme examples of culture, where often one trait is exaggerated above all the others. Again, it's like the classical warrior race, or the race that is supposedly all greedy. So those are kind of like the main hallmarks of those races that are explored. That is their culture. That is what they are known for. There may be nothing else. They may have little to no value on anything else besides those aspects. So it can just be kind of interesting to think about, and it also can observe what the kind of author thinks about those ideas. For example, are they giving a bit of balance state where there are both pros and cons to any idea? Or are they kind of going like, oh, I actually love this idea, or I absolutely loathe this idea, or this archetype, or whatever it is? And so it basically can pretty much show up in the writing for the most part, where they can either give a balance state or basically in favor or against. So it's one something to keep in mind when you're reading is that the bias can often come out when it comes to culture. But while I will get into how culture shock can impact us in real life, I first want to cover more examples of those shocked areas. And the first is kind of like the taboos and traditions, the little things, or basically the stuff that people would go, oh, we don't do that here. Or either we're horrified or just general, we don't know why you're doing that. So it's just something to really think about, like how do they treat their officials? How do they treat who they consider higher? Are there certain things that can get you in trouble that we would consider nothing somewhere else? So those are little things that can do, or are there just little oddities that people do that we don't actually understand the significance of? And they may not even understand the significance of, but it's something they do. It's their tradition. It's little things that can add up to trying to create a bit of a different culture than basically what people would be used to. And now that kind of leads into another area of a different morality in culture. Now, generally, this is often treated as like the good versus evil kind of cultures, and they're competing against each other because, oh, one side sees this as kind of so forth. But then sometimes it may not actually be typically about good or evil, but be different goals or rules. And I think the kind of question you can ask yourself is, what does success look like in this culture? What does being successful look like? Now then, you can have a culture that focuses on amassing wealth or getting all the best things, so they seek to pillage and so forth because that has been almost a natural incentive for them to do. Or maybe they're scavengers who are seeking to survive. So then they may do similar actions, but they have different aspects to them on why they're doing it. Or you can have the culture that is basically just like non-interference. They won't, even if it's in their power to change something, they won't do it just because they value that oath of non-interference. So it's sort of a different thing that can really change how people operate and how people view them. Again, typically we have the human lens, so it's kind of typical human asking, why are you doing this? So it's like sort of thing to really think about. Now, another area where there can be a bit of culture shock is in levels of advancement, especially technologically. Now, this can be kind of played with, and then where there are some areas that might be really advanced and some areas that can be really bad. Like take a lot of fantasy settings that have some sort of automaton or robot basically, but yet they don't actually have working TV or so forth like that. So it can be just very interesting what's how you play with it a bit. But typically, it can be seen as cultures that are below technologically or very advanced technologically. And that provides different events depending on where people are on the scale. But I guess the typical question is, how does one see those they deem as less advanced and less progressed or whatever than them? Oftentimes you tend to see it as, oh, this culture is treating others tearingly. They either want to give a hand up to uplift them or so forth, or to give them the advances, or maybe they just want to see them come into their own in their own timing. Or they may have their own reasons for kind of raising up people for their own benefit. But there's also the jerk who basically is advanced and knows it and will let everyone else know about it. And I think kind of one of the things that really stood out to me since I've been watching Stardate recently is basically how different sounding when someone refers to a culture as being young versus a culture being primitive. So it's just one of those things that to me very interesting, and just how different that comes off as, oh, this is a young race, a young culture versus you're primitive. So it was just sort of one of those things I found funny, at least. But those are the areas typically in stories. But how does it really affect our lives? How does culture shock affect our lives? Now, probably the first idea for most of us is travel. After all, we kind of live in an age where we can potentially visit many different cultures around the world. But one of the things I think we don't often ask ourselves is, how often when we go to different cultures, are we wanting to do things our way, as in the culture we are home a part of? Now, again, I could think of that as American perspective, but across the world, we all have our own ways of doing things. We all have our own cultures that we accept as normal. But when we visit another culture, do we suddenly just bring our culture and act like that's the normal way and that's how we should be treated? Or do we do a bit like when in Rome, do as the Romans do? So that's kind of a different mindset of what you have when you can potentially visit another culture. But the thing is, you don't have to go far to a visit to basically encounter culture shock. Because really any group we have own culture, and that is true in basically anywhere that there might be multiple different groups. A kind of typical example may be starting a new job. What is the workplace culture? You have to kind of either adapt or seek to change that workplace culture. Now, there may be incentives that encourage it one way or the other, but we can think of it like, is everyone in the business out for themselves? They're all competing for that next promotion. They're all kind of trying to push each other down, maybe take credit for others' work. Whatever it is, what is rewarded in that culture? Or is the culture basically about the team? We rise and we fall together. So what's going on there? And what happens when someone crosses over from one of those cultures to the other? So that's just kind of a typical example of culture. But the thing is that culture shock can even be one-on-one, because we all have our own ideas of our culture. Then we tend to think that our culture is best, or whatever, or our way of seeing things is the clearest and the purest form of view. We think, again, that's kind of why we do things the way we do generally, because we think it's supposedly the best way we can. We may have kind of those things where, yes, we can do better, but again, it's like, this is the way we do things. So when we encounter anyone who has a different perspective or a different opinion, there can be a bit of culture shock or culture clash when it comes to that. And I guess the thing to ask ourselves is, how do we see that? Do we just automatically assume we are right, or do we look to find out, why does the person see things from this point of view, and what perspective can they offer me? So those are just some of my thoughts on this matter. Why not share yours in the comments below? And if you enjoyed this video, you can like and share it so others may enjoy as well. Anyway, I'm Jonah, and you've been watching Lions Made Media, where we celebrate stories and listening to them. Thank you for listening to my musings. Talk to you later, and have a great rest of your day.